Is the excommunicated former Archbishop Vigano contesting the authority of all of the popes since the Second Vatican Council? That would include Paul VI, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI. Stick around to find out. Is Vigano now questioning the authority of all of the post-conciliar popes? Let me cut to the chase. Yes, yes, he is. I'm going to show that to you on video, so it's indisputable. And it kind of makes sense if what he is saying is true. He has already denied the authority of the Second Vatican Council. He doesn't believe it's a legitimate council, doesn't believe it has authority. And so it makes sense that all of the popes since Vatican II who have promulgated Vatican II, each one of them has confirmed the authority of Vatican II in their own magisterium. It would make sense to question them as well. Not only that, but it would also then make sense to question a lot of other things. And I'm going to connect those dots for you. Let me just do a few of them. If Vatican II is not legitimate, then the new rite of ordination that derives from Vatican II is also not legitimate. That would then mean the vast majority of the bishops in the world are not validly ordained. That would then mean most priests are not validly ordained. That would mean most of you Catholics have never received the Eucharist in your life. That would mean most of you Catholics have never been confirmed. That would mean most of you Catholics have never received absolution in the confessional. That would mean most of you Catholics who are married probably have a questionable and perhaps invalid marriage. You seeing the implications of this yet? That would then mean Vigano is playing all of the Catholics out there who say that they're in communion with Pope Francis and affirm the authority of Vatican II, or say that they affirm the authority of Vatican II and affirm all of the popes up into Pope Francis. He's playing every one of them because his view would basically say none of them are actually Catholics. Not really, at least not in any kind of meaningful sense of the word, because they've never received any sacrament aside from baptism. And that's why it's spiritual suicide for a Catholic to defend Vigano at this point. And there's many of them. There's a ton of them out there saying, I stand with Vigano. They're standing with an excommunicated schismatic who effectively is saying they've never received the Eucharist. They've never received God's grace. Aside from their baptism, never received sacramental grace. The implications of this are staggering. It would also mean all of those bishops out there, retired or not, who want to say a positive word about Vigano, they're saying favorable words towards a person who doesn't think that they're a bishop, unless they too have been reordained. Because as we recently discovered, it appears that Vigano has been recently reordained. And that would make sense because his ordination occurred with the new rite of ordination. Well, if he doesn't believe that's valid, then he would have to admit he was never consecrated a bishop, which is why it seems that he approached Bishop Williamson not long ago and was reordained. He went to a schismatic bishop to receive orders from a pre-Vatican II ritual to ensure that he is validly ordained. A lot of people have witnessed to this, testified to it, and he has yet to deny it. And frankly, it's absolutely necessary for him to maintain based on what you're hearing or about to hear in just a moment. Because if he hasn't been reconsecrated or ordained for the first time in his mind, then he also isn't a bishop, which would be self-contradictory for him to maintain this position of questioning the validity of Vatican II and all the post-conciliar popes. Let's watch it together. I know I told y'all recently, give it some time. It won't be long. He's not just going to deny that Francis is the Pope. He's going to carry this stuff to its logical conclusion, and he's going to say all of the post-conciliar popes aren't popes. Here it is. All right. So in this video, full speech of Vigano accusing the Pope. It is around the 7-minute mark, and let's watch it together. Oh, let me make sure that you can hear the audio. Okay.
Rather than salvation, we must conclude that the teachings of the conciliar church and the popes of the council from Paul VI onwards are an anomaly that calls into question the legitimacy of their authority.
You can't get any more explicit than that. Because again, if you deny the authority of Vatican II, which he just did in the video right before that, and you say it's not magisterial, then you're going to have to deny the authority of all the popes who have also promulgated this false council. You also have to then deny the validity of all the ordinations of all the bishops who have been ordained under the new rite of ordination, which is most bishops. You then have to deny the validity of the ordination of most priests today. That would then deny the validity of most masses today. That would then mean most of these Catholics have never been confirmed, received the Eucharist, had their sins absolved, and so on. Which is why, again, I'm saying it's spiritual suicide to say you're a Catholic, but you stand with this excommunicated schismatic. And he is playing people, because what he says in this video is really disingenuous. And by the way, notice his phraseology here. He is saying, well, it calls into question their authority. Right. This is what he does. And he's done it for years. He introduces a point that he's calling into question. And then a few months later, he's just outright saying, hey, yeah, this thing is invalid. It's no longer a question. He's just flat out saying it. Right now, he's calling it into question because he knows there's a lot of people listening to him who are still in communion with Pope Francis, or at least affirm Vatican II and the post-conciliar popes up into Francis, and he wants to get them on board. So he's just introducing it one step at a time. The next step is going to be much more bombastic claims about the new rite of ordination, about the majority of bishops. Right now in this video, he's calling on his brother bishops, a very dishonest expression from his perspective, because he doesn't actually believe that they're validly ordained. But right now he's calling on them, hoping that they'll come on board with his new schismatic parallel church. But when most of them don't, he will very quickly turn on them as well. And you'll start to notice that his vitriolic language that he has about Pope Francis and the Vatican right now, he'll start to apply it to those brother bishops. And then he'll start to explicitly say those brother bishops aren't even bishops to begin with. Well, let's watch another part here. Let's go to the 9-minute, 10-second mark of the video, because we see more false information from Vigano, basic blunders that any regular Catholic should know is misinformation. We saw him the other day say Lefebvre's excommunication was lifted post-mortem. It has never been lifted to this day. Just basic misinformation. Watch this one. Here we go.
Vatican and episcopate leaders makes us understand the gravity of the Virgin Mary's words at La Salette. Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist.
You heard that right. He is still promoting this expression as being authentic in nature. He says La Salette, and the Virgin Mary at La Salette says, Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. Now, if y'all watch Reason of Theology, you already know I've shown about 3 times now. I've pulled up the index of forbidden books and shown you that that is on the index. This was not part of the La Salette message. It was added later. It was never accepted by Rome. The original message of La Salette was approved. This part was added later and was never accepted by Rome. In fact, it was put on the index of forbidden books. basic information that, again, is easily accessible to someone like Vigano. He can do a quick Google search. It will come up at the very least under Reason and Theology if he just types it in. And he'll see where I'm showing people it's not approved. It's right here on the index. This is a false claim. By the way, he's not even considering the fact that we could distinguish between the See of Rome versus the people of Rome. There's certainly a difference, but that's really a moot point because the claim itself is not even authentic. The Virgin Mary never said it. But he's promoting this propaganda to what end? To build up his schismatic church, his parallel church that he's establishing, which I'll show y'all in a moment that he's establishing a parallel church that rivals the Catholic Church. So note these basic blunders that anybody with, like 10 seconds of Google skills could easily find out is bunk. Well, if he constantly has problems with making fake claims and claims that are easily accessible online to determine that they've been debunked, well, how much more of the material that he's been promoting out there should really be called into question? Okay, well, let's go to the 10-minute mark. And I want y'all to take note what he says here because it has massive implications for all of those Catholics who are defending Vigano right now. Let me share my screen. Watch what he says right here.
The gospel and defending Catholic truth. A schismatic sect accuses me of schism, which should highlight the subversion taking place.
All right, so he's saying that Pope Francis, the Catholic Church in communion with Pope Francis, is a schismatic sect. Let that sink in. Vigano is saying if you're in communion with Pope Francis, you're a schismatic. Let that sink in for a second. So if you're one of those people online who says, well, I believe Francis is the Pope, but Vigano's right, I stand with Vigano, you stand with a guy who thinks you're a schismatic. He thinks you're a schismatic. He's using you. He's playing you. How do you not see this? So if you're affirming him and validating him, you're undermining yourself. You're calling yourself a schismatic. That would then mean bishops who are promoting this guy are promoting someone who thinks that they're a schismatic and actually isn't a validly ordained bishop. It's, again, suicide, spiritual suicide. So let that sink in. He says, I'm not in schism with Rome and the Catholic Church. Rather, Pope Francis's church is in schism with me, and I belong to the real eternal Rome and the real true Catholic Church. Luther all over again, Eastern Orthodoxy all over again, and so on. Oriental Orthodoxy, every schismatic group all over again. They think that they're the true church, and it's Rome who's deviated. Well, he says, I'm not in schism. Francis is in schism from me. So again, if you're in communion with Pope Francis, let that sink in. Vigano's calling you a schismatic. You still want to defend this guy? Let's go to the 18-minute mark. Watch how disingenuous this is in light of what we just saw.
My accusations against Jorge Mario Bergoglio, before my brothers in the episcopate and the entire ecclesial body, I accuse Jorge Mario Bergoglio.
Did you hear the language that he's using? My brother bishops before the entire episcopate body. Unless he's talking about him and just a handful of bishops who are sedevacantist bishops in the world today, then this is disingenuous. And it's obvious he's referring to the Catholic bishops throughout the world. He doesn't believe they're brother bishops. He thinks that they haven't been validly ordained and they're part of a schismatic sect. From what you just saw there, he doesn't think they're validly ordained, thinks they're part of a schismatic sect, but then wants to appeal to them as brother bishops. Vigano is playing these guys. So again, any bishop who speaks up for Vigano is being played by Vigano. And this is very disingenuous and nefarious because he's trying to get them on board. And once he gets them hooked, then he can talk to them about, actually, let's go through this Episcopal consecration ceremony according to the pre-conciliar rite of ordination, because there's some questions about the validity of the ordination you received. So let's go ahead and go through this. And then he gets them reordained. Number one, it's a schismatic act in and of itself. And number two, it's a sacrilegious act, not only according to canon law, but longstanding Catholic tradition. This is what Vigano's doing. This is evil. This is demonic. This is disingenuous. Very clearly, at the 19-minute, 30-second mark, he says this.
Are persecuted with impunity by the Beijing government, with the Roman Sanhedrin's complicit silence. The rejection of the errors of Vatican II. I consider it an honor to be accused of rejecting the errors and deviations implied by the so-called Second Vatican Ecumenical Council. I believe this council lacks magisterial authority due to its inconsistencies compared to all the true councils of the Church, which I fully recognize and accept, along with all the magisterial acts of the Roman pontiffs.
Now, this is roughly equivalent to a newer version of the old Catholics who accepted everything up until Vatican I. He's like a new version of the old Catholics who accept everything up until Vatican II. But notice he says he doesn't recognize its magisterial authority. Okay, that then means John the 23rd, who called the council, and Paul VI, who closed it and promulgated it, lack magisterial authority. So he is again denying the authority of all popes from John the 23rd unto the present. That then means the new rite of ordination, false, invalid. Most bishops aren't bishops. Most priests aren't priests. Most of the Catholics out there have never received anything other than baptism and maybe in some cases a marriage, and that's it. You've never received the Eucharist in your entire life, never received a valid Eucharist. Unless you've received a sacrament, he's going to say, from the hands of somebody who has been ordained in the pre-conciliar rite, which is pretty rare right now. There's not a lot of them. There's only a handful of them in the world. Unless you've received a sacrament from their hands, and unless it's baptism, then you've never received a valid sacrament. And yet people are still foolish enough to say, I affirm Vatican II, or I affirm Pope Francis, or I affirm all the popes up into Pope Francis, but, they're still foolish enough to say all of those things, but Vigano's great. The guy who thinks that you're not a Catholic. People are being played. And I hope that this is connecting the dots for them so they stop doing this, because it's not in their own interest. Throughout the rest of the video, cum ex apostolatus officio, that document is brought up, of course. And this is a document from the 1500s that talks about how, if a heretic is elected pope, it's null and void. And again, he's ignoring all of the other popes who have come with new rules since then, ignoring it. Over the last 500 years, a lot of modifications for papal elections have occurred, and he's ignoring all those modifications and then talking about something from the 1500s. So that one comes up again. So this is another one of those really common arguments among the Sedevacantists, and it just shows you Vigano's been drinking the Kool-Aid, and he's just repeating the same arguments that the Sedevacantists have been giving us pretty much in the last several decades. The same arguments, he's just repeating them over and over and over. It shows you how unreliable he is. That was around the 10-minute mark. Around the 12-minute, 30-second mark, he mentions that new recent study document that was published by a dicastery. And now, obviously, the study document itself notes it isn't magisterial. It's not authoritative. The Pope didn't sign off on it. It is simply a study document about the papacy and what non-Catholics say about the papacy. That's it. It's a study document of here's what some Orthodox say, here's what some Lutherans say, here's what some so-and-so say. Now, they're going to say all kinds of stuff. And if you want to know what some heretics and schismatics say about the papacy, this is a great study document. There it is. That's what they say. There it is. Rome's not saying, but we're going to change the dogmas in the fundamental structure of the church. Rome's not saying that. But he presents that study document in this video as Rome is trying to change the constitution of the church and the papacy. It's disingenuous. It's like, really? It's just a study document that tells you what some schismatics believe about the papacy. We're not changing anything. So it's very disingenuous, but that will work on the average person who's already sympathetic to Vigano. That will work on them. People who aren't thinking critically, aren't familiar with the document, haven't looked at it, aren't aware of what's essential to the constitution of the church and what's not. This rhetoric will work on them. It's very effective for them. Also in the video, he makes an interesting statement. He says he's never been in communion with Pope Francis. It's a wild claim, given that we know he's been in communion with Pope Francis up until just a few years ago. I suppose he's trying to say that, well, I've never been in communion with Pope Francis because Pope Francis has never been a valid pope. Maybe that's what he's trying to say. It's a weird phrase, weird way to phrase the claim. Around the 1 minute mark, he speaks about how Pope Francis and the Vatican, it's all a Freemasonic infiltration, ignoring recently that Pope Francis just came out with a dicastery document through Cardinal Fernandez explicitly saying you can't be a Catholic and be a Freemason. Just, we're going to pretend that one didn't happen, huh? Oh, okay. So let me get this right. A Freemason infiltrated the church to spread Freemasonry by promulgating a document saying you can't be a Freemason and you can't be a Catholic. If you are a Freemason, they're incompatible. Yeah, that checks out. Okay. All right. What else? Well, at the 5 minute mark, he speaks about that fascinating conversation about Marcel Lefebvre, the Society of St. Pius X, founder of the Society of St. Pius X, that fascinating conversation about whether or not Lefebvre became a sedevacantist and denied that the Pope was the Pope towards the end of his life. Now, I did a whole video walking through a lot of quotes from Lefebvre that would necessitate that Lefebvre was a sedevacantist, but I point out he never said he was a sedevacantist or said that the Pope isn't the Pope, but he said things that would necessarily mean that's his position. It was a very shady thing, and he was very open to the view that the Pope is not the Pope, and again made some claims that would necessitate that he's a sedevacantist. Well, Vigano wants to say, well, hey, look, Lefebvre never came out and said that the Pope isn't the Pope. But he's basically sympathetic to the idea. And what I'm doing here is not really that different from Lefebvre because, some things have happened since then. And so that kind of justifies what I'm saying here. So he sees himself in continuity with Lefebvre. But that's also a shot at the Society of St. Pius X because the society says, no, we can't go down this path with Vigano. Well, that then means that the followers of the society have to now choose Vigano or the society because they're not in agreement on this fundamental point whether Francis is the Pope. The Society of St. Pius X says that's sedevacantism, and they're going to see that as schismatic. Vigano is saying if you affirm that Francis is the Pope, you're part of the schismatic sect. So that would then include the society that says Francis is the Pope, at least in his mind. So you have both of these groups basically saying the other one is schismatic. The society is indicating Vigano is schismatic. Vigano is indicating SSPX is schismatic. And not only SSPX, but really everybody else who belongs to the Francis sect. So people are going to have to choose. If they're on board with the society and Vigano, they're going to have to make a choice. What does that mean? Well, I'm not endorsing the society or Vigano. I think they need to come back into full communion with the Catholic Church. But the point is, there's a lot of people out there who follow both. So what you're going to see is deeper divisions among the radical traditionalists. And here I'm referring to this category of radical traditionalists. Not all rad trads are formally adhering to the society or Vigano. But I'm referring to those who either formally adhere to the society and or affirm Vigano. You're going to see further divisions with them. They're going to become more and more fragmented. And you're going to see Vigano become more and more vitriolic towards those who don't come on board with him. Right now, he's super nice. He's nice on camera. And yeah, well, guys, I have to do this. Duty bound in my conscience. Luther all over again. I got to do this. That facade's going to drop really soon when people don't join his sect. Watch. Of course, at the 6-minute mark, we hear more basic information. He accuses Pope Francis of idolatry. This has, of course, been debunked over and over. Applying the Pachamama thing, got a whole video on it, about 3.5 hours, giving you literally everything you ever need to know about the Pachamama issue. And showing you that there was no idolatry here. And the whole claim that this was Pachamama was a media stunt. So he's still pulling that one. And again, it's going to work on a lot of people who have been ripe for the picking for a long time. The groundwork for a Vigano has been laid for a long time. And y'all know I've been fighting against this stuff as much as I can, but I'm a very small voice over and against the whole cacophony of, a 1,000 other voices out there, some of who have a lot more larger audience, laying the groundwork for all of these claims over the last 10 or 11 years. So a lot of these people have been buying into the media propaganda about the Pope, who've been drinking that Kool-Aid. They're ripe for the picking right now to fall for a Vigano. Which means what? Well, it means that they're joining a parallel church that is not the Catholic Church. Why do I say that? Not only because he's an excommunicated schismatic, but also because I've been warning about this for over a year. Let me share my screen. This is LifeSiteNews, the propaganda arm for this new parallel church that is not Catholic. What you're about to see shows you that LifeSiteNews is not a Catholic website. It is the media arm, the propaganda arm of a new parallel church that is a schismatic church that is not in communion with the Catholic Church. By their own admission. Vigano is saying, by his own admission, yeah, I'm not in communion with that church. I'm not in communion with Pope Francis's church. Okay, so in other words, for everybody who knows that Francis is the Pope and that's where the Catholic Church is, he's admitting he's not part of the Catholic Church. So both Pope Francis agree he's not part of the Catholic Church because he's been excommunicated. And Vigano agrees he's not part of this Catholic Church. He believes he's part of his own Catholic Church, but he's not part of this one. So we're all in agreement. This is a parallel church. There's something completely different. So LifeSiteNews that has been promoting this has been laying a lot of the groundwork for the parallel church. Watch this. This was posted December 8th, 2023, but it wasn't the first time they posted something promoting Vigano's parallel church. Archbishop Vigano announces house of formation to train priests who will resist errors of Vatican II. So in other words, Vigano has a schismatic seminary who trains priests. He then he validly but illicitly ordains them. So they become valid priests, but illicitly ordained, and therefore they can't exercise any ministry in the church. He takes those priests and he sends them into the territory of Catholic bishops and sends them into their diocese. That's called a parallel church. We've had many of those in the last 2,000 years. Eastern Orthodoxy is one of them, Oriental Orthodoxy another. It's a parallel church. Old Catholics, Assyrian Church of the East, parallel church. Vigano has created a new one, sends those priests into the territories of validly ordained and legitimate successors of the apostles who are legitimately exercising authority, sends priests into their territory to celebrate Mass without the permission of the local bishop or the Pope. Again, that's called a parallel church. That's a schism. That's a completely separate church that is separated from the one true Catholic Church. LifeSiteNews has been preparing for this and has been laying the groundwork and helping people come on board with this. This isn't the first time, again, that they said it. It is just one example where I pull it up from back in December. The new seminary, under his supervision, it says, while insisting that good and holy priests are needed who are not subject to the blackmail of having to accept the errors of Vatican II and the deviations of Pope Francis in order to exercise their ministry. And again, LifeSiteNews is promoting this. So it tells you they are the media arm, a propaganda arm of a false church, a parallel church. It's not a Catholic website. When they say, I stand with Vigano now after he's excommunicated, that should tell you these are not Catholics. These are people who stand with an excommunicated man setting up a parallel church, undermining the one true church of Christ. And you think that I'm just making this up? Nope. I did a whole video showing this before, back when it happened. This article was mentioned in April, but I think it was a few days prior to this article that I did a show. I'll have to go back and look at it. But here's where Bishop Powers, a Catholic bishop, in February, Bishop Powers warned his diocese of an establishment called the Hermitage of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph in Cumberland, Wisconsin, noting the very questionable canonical status of Brian Wallman and Rebecca Siegler, the two individuals reportedly running the institution. Powers said that neither had provided proper documents establishing their canonical status. In his letter on Friday, Powers asked for clarification from Vigano about his alleged role in ordaining and sending Wallman to the superior diocese. Without proof of a valid ordination to the priesthood, Brian Wallman is putting the spiritual lives of some people, of my people, in danger, Powers wrote. So you have bishops in the Catholic Church who are saying, there's these new priests showing up in my territory, and they're claiming to be ordained by Vigano. And they're claiming to be sent here by Vigano. And they have no authority in the church today. I didn't ordain them, and I'm not allowing them to be here. But they're here, and they're celebrating sacraments. And so he's asking Vigano, what's going on, Vigano? Are you ordaining priests and sending priests to my territory? Yeah, that's what he's doing. Yeah, that's exactly what he's doing. Been warning about this for a while now. Been sounding the alarm. Unfortunately, Bishop Powers didn't see that, because I've been mentioning for a while, hey, be aware, bishops are going to start to have priests showing up in their diocese who exercise zero authority today. And here's one of those bishops. And he's like, what's going on? Being blindsided by this. Well, guess what? That's about to happen to a whole bunch of other bishops. A ton of other bishops. Unfortunately, some of them have been asleep at the wheel and haven't been shutting this stuff down by speaking out against it. So what's happening is a lot of other people are coming on board with Vigano's new church and parallel church. They're getting ordained, and they're going to come into the territory of other bishops who are validly ordained and validly exercise authority in the church today. And they're going to wreak havoc, and they're going to steal the sheep from their own flock. So bishops out there who have been silent about this issue are probably about to have some of their sheep stolen. It's happening right now. And you're probably about to see it grow more and more and more, because I'm seeing a lot of support for Vigano growing more and more and more. I want to show you something else that is very concerning. Let me share my screen. Bishop Strickland posted this yesterday with, again, LifeSiteNews. LifeSiteNews is, again, not a Catholic website. It is the media arm of this new parallel church, a church of dissent against the true Catholic Church, a church that, or a community that is promoting a false parallel church that is undermining the one true Church of Christ, but still claiming to be Catholic and pulling the wool over people's eyes. That's what LifeSiteNews is. Well, Strickland goes with LifeSiteNews and says the Vatican is more interested in silencing Archbishop Vigano than addressing his allegations. I thought that's weird in light of some things I've seen Strickland say going back the last few years that I'm about to show to you. And also in light of the fact that in 2020, the Vatican came out with the full report on McCarrick, giving us the who, what, when, where, why, who knew what, when, where, and how, and everything, giving us receipts on everything. 461-page report. And in that report, I just did a video on it less than a month ago. I put a link to it in the show notes. It's a 3.5-hour video. I go over every detail showing you how there are a lot of problems with Vigano and his relationship to Cardinal McCarrick, the accused abuser, who was laicized by Pope Francis. And I show Vigano failed to rein McCarrick in, knowing about McCarrick, failed to rein him in and do things about him when he had several chances and opportunities, and failed to follow the instructions that the Vatican gave him in 2012 about a priest who claimed he was abused by McCarrick. He barely did anything about it, and it was not what the Vatican told him to do, so he did not sufficiently address that issue. And that then meant that the situation with McCarrick was delayed, and he wasn't disciplined as quickly as he could have been. It's all spelled out in that 2020 document that's available online for free for everyone to read. But if you don't want to read it, I did a video condensing it for you. You might say, well, that's really long. But you know what? This is a really important issue, and there's a lot of ground to cover. And there's a lot that Vigano had in relation to McCarrick that, I needed to put in that video. And so that's why it's 3.5 hours, because there was a lot going on there. Unfortunately, I haven't seen Bishop Strickland address that. So for him to bring up the Vigano and McCarrick issue makes me scratch my head, because this has been out 4 years. But it gets even more concerning when we consider everything that Strickland has said from before the McCarrick report in 2020 and after the McCarrick report, right after it was released, unto yesterday on the screenshot that I just showed you. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what Strickland has said. Obviously not something exhaustive, but something quick that shows you the substance of what he has said about this. And this is where it gets even more troubling. So again, he says with, again, this fake Catholic, non-Catholic website, LifeSiteNews, Vigano announces, here it is. Bishop Strickland, the Vatican is more interested in silencing Vigano than addressing his allegations. Okay, now that's weird in light of this video. Now, this was done right before that McCarrick report. This was January 21 of 2020. Now, the McCarrick report came out in November 10th of 2020. So this was at the beginning of 2020. The report comes out later. So this is before the report came out. Bishop Strickland meets with Pope Francis face-to-face and asks him about the McCarrick report. Watch what he says. broadened his understanding. It was really helpful. Okay, some people are saying they couldn't hear it. Let me play it again because this is really important. Let me start it over. Hold on. Sometimes if I reshare the screen and don't hit enable audio, it turns the audio off. All right, let's do it again.
I did ask him about the McCarrick situation, and I can say he did give some perspective. He broadened my understanding of the whole issue, and it was very helpful.
That's not the end. We're going to watch more, but just a pause. Take that in. Meets with the Pope, expresses his concerns about the McCarrick report. Now, I'll remind you, prior to this, he said he read Vigano's claims about Pope Francis covering for McCarrick, and he finds those claims to be credible. That's what Strickland said at the time. So he then goes and asks Pope Francis about it, and he says Pope Francis kind of put him at ease, brought in his perspective. It was a really great meeting. Now, see, this is not something he says anymore, though, right? He doesn't say that anymore. But at the time, he was saying this when he met with Pope Francis. But let's keep going.
Bishop Strickland drew widespread attention in August 2018 for a public statement saying he found credible the allegations made by retired Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, the former.
He tells that to his flock. I find him credible. This is when he was still a bishop of a diocese, the Bishop of Tyler. Then he goes and meets with Pope Francis. He feels like Pope Francis answered his questions sufficiently, put him at ease, broadened his horizon. Now, all of a sudden, when he's no longer bishop and Pope Francis removes him, then we start to see Strickland amping up on the claims of, oh, they're not addressing the McCarrick allegations. And you're seeing him saying stuff like, well, they're not addressing his allegations and they're trying to silence Vigano. Aside from the fact that they're not silencing Vigano, Vigano literally says he's not in communion with Pope Francis. So they're just recognizing he's already excommunicated himself. But aside from that, we see a shift after he was removed from ministry. Before, it's like, okay, Pope Francis answered things. I feel better now. But after he removes him from ministry, it's like, you know what? This whole thing that happened 4 years ago, that wasn't actually addressed. It gets worse, though. Watch.
Former nuncio to the United States, who alleged that top Vatican officials, including Pope Francis, knew that then Cardinal Theodore E. McCarrick had been accused of sexual misconduct.
My message was, it does need to be dealt with. I would love to have seen it totally disproven, which I think it hasn't been. I mean, there definitely were elements there, and possibly Archbishop Vigano went overboard on some issues. I mean, he's just a man also. Archbishop Vigano said Pope Francis should resign. I never intended to embrace that because, I mean, that's a major thing to say. I don't know if Archbishop Vigano still stands by that or not. I certainly didn't want to validate that, but
So what are we hearing so far? To recap, we're hearing, okay, well, I find these claims about Pope Francis to be credible, then goes and meets with Pope Francis. He broadened my horizon, gave me some things to think about I didn't think about, made me feel good, answered all my questions. There's some things that haven't been disproven, some things that Vigano said that haven't been disproven, but I'm not on board with everything that Vigano said, like calling for Pope Francis's resignation. That's what we're hearing so far.
I said, these allegations about McCarrick need to be investigated. And
okay, so he's calling for an investigation. And he, of course, got that investigation.
They have been.
Catholic News Service asked Bishop Strickland if he thought Pope Francis had known about the allegations against McCarrick since 2013, as Archbishop Vigano claimed.
Honestly, I'd have to say I don't know. And speaking again of nuance and looking at the real context of things, because some of the things that Pope Francis said makes you realize it's always a bigger picture than maybe the slice that you're looking at. He did indicate a broader context that is challenging for all of us. So I certainly am not ready to judge the actions in the moment of any of the pontiffs.
So did Pope Francis know that he was an abuser? He's saying, well, I don't know. I'm not ready to judge him. He gave me a lot to think about, broadened my horizon, blah, 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 blah. Now, McCarrick report drops, because that was, again, all said before the McCarrick report dropped. Then the McCarrick report dropped. This is November 16th of 2020. Again, 6 days after the McCarrick report was released. Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas, said the recently released report on former Cardinal McCarrick, describing his ascent to the highest rungs of the church, even amid rumors of abuse, read like a list of 7 deadly sins: lust, greed, gluttony, wrath, sloth, envy, pride. Pretty much the report covers all of them. Now, a person who says, hey, the report covers all this, let me ask you a question. If somebody told you, hey, the report covers all this, is that a person who is implying they read the report? Or at the very least, they're familiar with the contents of the report. Maybe somebody read it to them, right? You would think, right? So all of that information I've shown to you on that 3.5-hour video, where I go over pages 374 to like 380 something, especially that area that talks about priest 3's allegations against McCarrick and Vigano not handling that situation well. All that prior stuff where I'm showing you Vigano is going to places with McCarrick, knowing the stuff about McCarrick, knowing the claims that were made about him and that he himself made about him in 2006 and 2008. Knowing all that stuff, he's going to public places with them. He's just partying and laughing it up, and they're talking theology, and he's giving them public praises. Vigano's publicly praising McCarrick. McCarrick's asking him, hey, should I maybe stop going to places and stop being so visible? Vigano doesn't tell him no, doesn't stop him, never confronts him about priest 3's allegations against McCarrick, doesn't follow the instructions, all of the instructions that were given to him by Cardinal Wale. I go over all of that. And again, to the end of him being nuncio, never confronted McCarrick. Vigano never confronted him. So Strickland knows all this, right? You can't say, well, he didn't read it. Well, here he's saying, here's what the report reads like. Here's the problem with the report. It's a confirmation of all the deadly sins, and we haven't finished all of his comments yet. But a person who says this is a person who's read it then. So I have to assume Strickland has read that 2020 McCarrick report. I have to assume that if he's going to comment on it. Otherwise, don't comment on something you haven't read. Right? So I got to assume he's read it. So that means he knows all this stuff about Vigano. So that means whenever he's saying that the Vatican hasn't really addressed the allegations of McCarrick, he should know better than that. That also means the fact that he doesn't call Vigano out for his failure to rein in McCarrick and follow up with priest 3's allegation to the extent that Wale instructed him. The fact he doesn't call him to repentance on that is troubling. I mean, aside from the fact that it's really troubling that Strickland isn't calling Vigano to repentance for his excommunication and schism. That's weird, right? Especially when Strickland and others want to say, well, fiducia isn't calling same-sex attracted people who are acting on that to repentance. Well, you guys aren't calling schismatics to repentance. Even though, again, I don't agree with that claim about fiducia. Even if that were true, they're not calling schismatics to repentance. So you got to start with yourself. You got to call sinners yourself to repentance, and then we can talk about others. But again, putting that to the side, watch what else he says in that interview, November 16, 2020. He says the report covers all of these sins. He said this during the more than half hour of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops allowed the prelates November 16 to discuss the report released by Vatican November 10th. The bishops all got together to discuss it. It was the first time the U.S. prelates as a group discussed the findings of the investigation of one of its own after the long-awaited release. The session was part of the first day of the U.S. Bishops' annual Fall General Assembly held online November 16 and 17 this year because of the pandemic. Now watch what Strickland says, quote, "I think we need to really, as pastors, acknowledge that we're all sinners and we're all called away from sin. But the report shows sometimes pastors and others can turn a blind eye to sin," Strickland said. I think that could be the title of the report. Now that's weird. So Strickland is saying, hey, the title of the report needs to be, "We're turning a blind eye to sin." Meanwhile, to my knowledge, Strickland is not addressing Vigano's involvement with McCarrick. Is that turning a blind eye to sin? Some would say yes. Some would say yes. If I'm missing something, if Strickland has called Vigano out for his failure to address priest 3 to the extent that Wale called him to, and all of the other issues surrounding Vigano and McCarrick failing to rein in McCarrick, seemingly turning a blind eye in some instances to McCarrick, you would think, again, Strickland would know this information because he evidently read the report. He talks about its content, so he would know this. Some would say, well, does this mean that they're turning a blind eye to what Vigano did here? Because, again, to my knowledge, I'm not aware of Bishop Strickland calling this out with Vigano. There's an implied support for Vigano here, an indictment on the Vatican on his part, claiming that the Vatican has not actually addressed his allegations when, again, in reality, the church has done more than address the allegations that Vigano brought up concerning McCarrick. 461 pages. How much more do you need? What else would that be? And again, he said this yesterday, 4 years after the report that he allegedly read. But what's not being addressed by Strickland and others, unfortunately, is Vigano's involvement with McCarrick. Now, I'm not saying Vigano is solely responsible for everything with McCarrick and Vigano didn't do anything in any circumstance. No, that's not what I'm saying. If you go and watch the video, I show you what he did do in some cases and didn't do in others. But it's the didn't do in others stuff that was incredibly negligent and problematic. And Vigano has yet to address this in any kind of sufficient way. Everything he said so far about the allegations against him, he just basically dismissed it, makes a comment here and there that really is absolutely irrelevant to the claims addressed against him, and moves on. That's inadequate. And that's not holding Vigano to accountability. Something the Bishop Strickland says he wants accountability for the people involved with McCarrick. Well, where's that accountability call when it comes to the people that we said were credible? It all of a sudden stops then. We don't want to hold them accountable, it would seem. That's the impression that I'm getting. Well, the article continues. In 460 pages, the report showed how laity, seminarians, and even prelates over decades made an effort to call attention to the church's hierarchy to, in writing and sometimes verbally, incidences of abuse on part of McCarrick. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. You can go and check it out. But here Strickland says it's very clear that there's still very much a tendency in the world and in the church to turn a blind eye to many of these sins. I agree with that. I agree with Bishop Strickland. I also would add to what Bishop Strickland says, there's also a tendency to turn a blind eye to some of the people that we've given our approval for that we should have never approved. There is a tendency to turn a blind eye. Maybe we want to turn a blind eye to Vigano's involvement with McCarrick. Maybe there's a tendency to do that. It doesn't stop there. Plot thickens. This is from December 9th of 2020. So again, this is after the McCarrick report has been released that Strickland, I have to assume, read because he's commenting on the contents of it. Bishop Strickland, McCarrick report reveals web of corruption. Again, now if a guy is telling you, hey, the report reveals a web of corruption, that means you've read it, right? And that then means that you're aware of Vigano's involvement in that web of corruption, right? Where's the comments about that, though? He stated that although the McCarrick report may have answered some questions and concerns, it did not give real accountability for the scandal. Now, I just have some questions. It's 461 pages filled with details of everything. Who, what, when, where, why, what, how. Receipts everywhere. I thought that it does show where the accountability is. I think it does show where the responsibility is in relation to McCarrick. I think it does address that. What else do you want it to address? What other aspects of accountability need to be addressed? Honest question. And then if we're going to speak of accountability for the scandal, what about accountability for Vigano and his involvement in that scandal? Where's the accountability there? I also have to ask, why is Bishop Strickland still promoting, in at least to an extent, and defending at least to an extent, Bishop Vigano, in light of that, the contents of that report showing his involvement? And number two, why is he defending, at least to an extent, a bishop who doesn't think that Bishop Strickland is a bishop? In Vigano's mind, Bishop Strickland is not a bishop, unless Bishop Strickland has also been recently reordained by Bishop Williamson or someone else, which to my knowledge he hasn't been, so I don't believe he has. Unless that happened, Vigano doesn't think that Strickland is a bishop. All of Strickland's sacraments, all of his masses are invalid. Strickland has never probably received a valid Eucharist in Vigano's mind, if what Vigano is saying is true. Because again, you have to remember, Vigano is saying Vatican II is invalid, no authority behind it. That then means the new rite of ordination since the Second Vatican Council is invalid. That means almost every bishop in the world today is an invalid bishop. Almost every priest is an invalid priest. Almost every mass is an invalid mass. Almost every confession is an invalid confession. Almost every confirmation is an invalid confirmation. Many marriages are invalid. That would then mean Bishop Strickland isn't a bishop if this is true. Why defend a guy who thinks that about you? Why do this? Over and against the Pope, the papacy? It's wild. If what Vigano is saying is true, that means Bishop Strickland has never been a bishop. Why continue to support this guy? Why continue to back him up? Vigano's creating a parallel church, as I just showed y'all. Well, why continue to offer support for this guy? He's creating a parallel church. So I want to know, why isn't Strickland calling him to repentance? Why doesn't he call him to repentance for his involvement with McCarrick? Why doesn't he call Vigano to repentance for his creation of a parallel church and sending priests into the territory of other bishops? Why isn't he calling Vigano to repentance for schism, for false teachings, for wildly slanderous claims about the successor of St. Peter, for false teachings about Vatican II and the denial of Vatican II, and now for a denial of the authority of all the popes since Vatican II, including John Paul II, Benedict, Francis, and so on. Paul VI, John 23rd, denying all of those. Why doesn't Strickland call him to repentance on that? Instead, what we hear is, well, you know what? Vigano's claims weren't sufficiently addressed by the Vatican. That ain't going to work. Lastly, I want to briefly address this propaganda from the new propaganda machine of this new parallel church, LifeSiteNews. Again, LifeSiteNews is promoting this new parallel church of Vigano, where he's sending schismatic priests into the territory of diocesan bishops and setting up a parallel church without the authority of the local bishop or the Pope. They're the main promoters of this new parallel church, and they stand with Vigano, who's been excommunicated. So it's no longer a Catholic website. It's not a Catholic apostolate. It is an apostolate and website and a propaganda arm for this fake parallel church, the Church of Veganism, the Veganism Church. So here's what one of the veganist apologists, John Henry Westen, founder of LifeSiteNews, wants to say about Vigano's excommunication. Let me make sure that you can hear it. Share my screen. And you should be able to hear it right around now.
There's huge breaking news today out of the Vatican, where the Vatican Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith has announced that it has declared whistleblower Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, the former U.S. nuncio, to be guilty of schism and automatically excommunicated. Vigano is best known for having publicly revealed that he informed Pope Francis at the beginning of his papacy that Cardinal Theodore McCarrick was a sex abuser. Vigano did this because Pope Francis resuscitated Cardinal McCarrick from the silencing he was under previous pontificates, and he was going around making deals like the China deal was disastrous. So imagine this. Pope Francis's Vatican has declared whistleblower Archbishop Vigano excommunicated while Pope Francis was personally involved in undoing the excommunication of notorious sex abuser priest Father Rupnik. And not only is Father Rupnik not excommunicated, he's still an active priest. Crazy. Go check out LifeSiteNews for the full details. God bless you.
All right, I wanted to show the whole video to you first because people don't like it when I pause mid-video. So I showed you the whole video. Now let me interact with it.
There's huge breaking news today out of the Vatican, where the Vatican Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith has announced that it has declared whistleblower Archbishop Carlo Maria.
Whistleblower. He's not a whistleblower. It turns out, again, he had his share and his involvement with McCarrick, and he unfortunately failed to follow up on certain credible accusations against McCarrick, failed to silence McCarrick. All of that, again, is revealed in that 3.5-hour video where I go over the Vatican's 2020 McCarrick report, showing Vigano's involvement with McCarrick. Of course, he's not going to address that. He's going to continue with this narrative that somehow Vigano's being silenced as a whistleblower. Well, nonsense. He's not a victim here. He had a hand in failing to rein in McCarrick. The facts are indisputable. All of the receipts are in that 2020 report. That video is there in the show notes. You can go and watch it. See all the details for yourself. So he's not a whistleblower. And again, Vigano himself says he's not in communion with Pope Francis. Of course, the church is going to say he's been automatically excommunicated. What do you want the church to still say that they're in communion with the guy who says, I'm not in communion with him? And running around creating a parallel church that this group is promoting? Of course, they're going to say he's been excommunicated. And the excommunication goes back to the moment of the crime where he says Pope Francis isn't the Pope. The Vatican didn't just now excommunicate him. They're just saying he's been excommunicated. So notice how he's spinning it and gaslighting, but it gets worse.
Maria Vigano, the former U.S. nuncio, to be guilty of schism and automatically excommunicated. Vigano is best known for having publicly revealed that he informed Pope Francis at the beginning of his papacy that Cardinal Theodore McCarrick was a sex abuser.
He says that. He says in 2018 that he told Pope Francis this information in 2013. But then it turns out that a lot of other things he said right around that time turned out to be false. Because when we go to that time in 2013, we're seeing video footage of certain things happening. And then Vigano in 2018 is telling us about those same things, not knowing that video footage is out there. And he's telling us something else. Again, I document all that in that 3.5-hour video showing you. He claims Pope Francis screamed at him whenever he first met him. He says this back in 2018 concerning his 2013 meeting with Pope Francis. Turns out we got video footage of the very meeting that he's referring to. And Pope Francis wasn't yelling and screaming at him. And then when he's confronted with the video footage, then his story changes. He's not a credible person. He changes his claims whenever he's confronted with the truth. Changes things or just ignores the claims altogether. Ignores the facts altogether. So he says he told Pope Francis that McCarrick was a sex abuser. Meanwhile, at the same time, Vigano's not doing anything to rein in McCarrick, knowing what he knows about McCarrick. So who really is sheltering and protecting McCarrick at this point in light of the evidence? Certainly not Pope Francis. And I don't believe him, and I don't take him at his word when he said, I told Pope Francis and he just didn't do anything about it. I don't take him at his word because his word is already bunk, given the things that we can verify in video footage, given the archives of the nuncio, given all of the receipts, given all the people who made the accusations about McCarrick and their own testimony, given other video footage we have of Vigano, I can't take his word because it doesn't match up with things we can verify. So again, go and watch that video, 3.5 hours. I can't reproduce it all, but I'll just have to say, for people who are watching this propaganda here, they're going to buy it up because they don't have all the facts. So you can see how much more nefarious this propaganda is.
Vigano did this because Pope Francis resuscitated Cardinal McCarrick from the silencing he was under previous pontificate.
False. He wasn't silenced by Benedict. Benedict asked informally for McCarrick to keep a low profile. That was it. There was no formal sanctions, nothing. He just informally asked. Vigano's aware that Benedict did that. And yet, the entire time during Vigano as the nuncio to the United States, where does he tell McCarrick to stop going around and traveling? He doesn't. As the report shows, he knows all of his schedule. He knows everywhere where McCarrick is going. In fact, he's going there sometimes with McCarrick and praising him there. So he knows McCarrick's schedule, knows he's traveling, knows he's giving speeches. He allows for it and even joins in with it, knowing that he's supposed to be silent, according to Benedict. He knows all this, and he doesn't do anything to stop McCarrick. And when McCarrick asks him, hey, do you want me to keep a lower profile? He doesn't tell him, yeah, go ahead. You know what Benedict told you, right? He doesn't confront McCarrick about it. Nothing. Doesn't do it. And so McCarrick keeps doing it. And then again, when Priest 3's allegations come to the attention of Vigano, writes to Cardinal Wale about what to do about it, Wale tells him what to do. He doesn't follow up with everything that Wale told him to do. So, again, until the very end of him being nuncio in 2016, he didn't silence McCarrick. Why is that? So if he's this hero that he's claiming to be and blaming it all on Pope Francis, why wasn't he actually doing anything about McCarrick? It seems to me that he realized he was about to be exposed. In 2018, he realized this McCarrick report is about to come out, and I know I dropped the ball in some areas, and I didn't do enough about McCarrick like I should have. Seems to me he realized that, and so instead he shifts the blame onto Pope Francis. That's the way it comes across. Well, let's continue.
And he was going around making deals like the China deal was disastrous.
And again, was McCarrick silencing him and prohibiting him from doing that? Nope. So if that's true, you can thank Vigano for that. Thank Vigano for it. Because Vigano had his own share in it by not silencing him, by not restricting him. Yeah, thank him for that. But also, I don't buy this stuff about the China deal anyway. We don't even know what the China deal says. So you can't comment on it like this. One day when we get access to that deal, then we can talk about it.
So imagine this. Pope Francis's Vatican has declared whistleblower Archbishop Vigano excommunicated while Pope Francis was personally involved in undoing the excommunication of notorious sex abuser priest Father Rupnik.
Wow. Interesting. Given the fact it was Pope Francis that has lifted the statute of limitations on the Rupnik case, and that is why Rupnik is currently undergoing a trial. This is as of October 27, 2023. Francis is the one who lifted the statute of limitations so that he can go undergo this trial that is currently going on. Pope Francis did that. So don't pretend that Pope Francis is somehow protecting Rupnik when it's the exact opposite. Not only that, the Rupnik case, according to Monsignor Kennedy, who's over the disciplinary section of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, it's that Rupnik case is complex, but in its advanced stage. So we're going to find out something about Rupnik in this case soon. Thanks to Pope Francis, who lifted the statute of limitations to allow for this to go through. Now, of course, John Henry Westen, the new apologist for this fake parallel church of veganism, this veganist apologist, not Catholic, of course he doesn't tell you that. He doesn't tell you, well, actually it was Pope Francis. He doesn't say that. He just leads you to believe it's somehow Pope Francis allowing for this other accused abuser to get away with everything, but then he's trying to silence a whistleblower. Yeah, it's just not true. And the facts are against them. They have lost the plot. LifeSiteNews has lost it. They've lost the plot. And all these people defending Vigano lost the plot. I got a question for John Henry Westen. Again, if what Vigano's saying is right, John Henry, you've actually never been confirmed. You probably have never received the Eucharist. You may or may not have a valid marriage. If he's married, I don't even know. May or may not. You have never likely received absolution in the confessional. Your bishop isn't a bishop. Your priest isn't a priest, assuming that John Henry Westen goes to a diocesan liturgy and is not going to something SSPX or something like that. If what Vigano is saying is true, then what does that mean for John Henry Westen? Unless John Henry Westen is now part of this new parallel church. It'd be interesting to see what John Henry has to say about that. The veganist apologists have lost it. They've lost the plot. I think that at this point they have exposed themselves. And all I have to do is just call people's attention to it. I don't even have to expose them. I just have to say, guys, pay attention to what they're saying. Did you hear what he said? There it is. All I have to do is just put a spotlight on it, just show you, here's what they said. You paying attention? You connecting the dots yet? They lost the plot. It's over for these guys. Everybody, put your questions there in the comment section. Put it to @Reason and Theology, and I'll take a look at a few of them. Give y'all just a moment to go ahead and do that. So go ahead and put it in the chat. We will continue right after this. For years, I've tirelessly defended the Catholic magisterium, despite pushback from numerous people slandering this ministry, misrepresenting it, and calling for its cancellation. Our situation today is very similar to the days of St. Maximus the Confessor, who was constantly pressured to deviate from the teachings of Rome and embrace the heresies that many other bishops were promoting. He was exiled, ridiculed, slandered, but he stood fast despite this persecution, which also included the imperial court of Constantinople cutting off his arm and ripping out his tongue so that he could no longer write the truth and speak the truth. It can be costly to speak the truth and defend the papacy in an age that is so hostile towards it, just like during the days of St. Maximus. But this is what we are called to do. This is the faith and tradition of our forefathers. I plead for all Catholics to stand up for our church and defend it. And consider supporting this channel that has been vindicated by Rome's decisions time after time again. You can do that by subscribing and supporting this ministry at patreon.com/Reason and Theology or reasonandtheology.locals.com. There's also a PayPal and a GoFundMe link in the description of this video. God bless. I want to again remind everybody, warn all Catholics out there about this new veganist church. Share this video with them. Tell them about this new veganist church, veganism. That's a neo-Protestant movement. Tell them about this new church that has been created by Vigano. So its founder, of course, being Vigano, the movement itself should be known as veganism, right? With an I rather than an E. And warn them about it so that they don't leave the Catholic Church and join the new veganist sect that claims it's Catholic. Briefly take a look here at the chat, see a lot of comments, but I'm looking for questions. Let's see. AJ is saying that we need to pray that LifeSiteNews is shut down. Well, look, I don't know how any Catholic could take them seriously at this point. It's clearly a propaganda arm for the veganist church. It's clearly not in communion with the Catholic Church. Matthew says, part of me thinks Strickland needs to be silenced by Rome. I would rather Strickland embrace the truth and become a great defender of the Catholic Church. That'd be awesome. I'd love that. I'd rather that happen. So my hope and prayer for Strickland is that he sees the truth, sees how there are a lot of people surrounding him who are using him and are perhaps not sharing certain information with him, giving him a false understanding of the situation, and using him for their own agenda, and in some cases for this new parallel church of veganism. I would rather see him just turn away from that, embrace the truth, and become a great defender of the Catholic Church. I love that he wants to guard the deposit of faith. I love that. I love that. That's what every bishop should do. But he's not doing that right now. He thinks he's doing that, but he's not. I would love for him to actually do that and guard the deposit of faith that includes fidelity to the Holy See and its magisterial teachings. What can one do if a person's listening to LifeSite or the Remnant? Send them this material that shows them the truth and pray that they receive the grace necessary to respond to the truth of the matter. Best way to tell my anti-Catholic family members that I want to join the Catholic Church. It's going to be a really difficult situation because I don't know all of the details, just general advice. You could certainly just kind of sit them down and explain, hey, look, I've been studying scripture, I've been studying church history, and I'm convinced that this is where the truth is, this is where Jesus's church is, and I'm bound to submit to that and become a Catholic. Maybe try to take that approach. But again, I need to know more before I could give more specific details. So he went through seminary, talking about Vigano, and he served how many years? Now when excommunicated, he questions Vatican II. He needs to toe the new party line, I think. Well, he's been questioning Vatican II before he was excommunicated. In fact, he, again, excommunicated himself probably, 1.5, 2 years ago? I don't remember exactly when it was. When he was excommunicated. It's just now that the Vatican is confirming that. And he's been doing this for a while now. So, yeah, he's been saying this for a while. But this information about him now questioning the authority of all the post-conciliar popes, that to my knowledge is new. That only just happened to my knowledge. LifeSite needs to stop selling veganos. Well, I mean, how can they when they're the propaganda arm for this parallel church of veganism? Do we know who's funding LifeSiteNews? I bet they have all kinds of people who fund them. I'm sure it's a lot of laity who fund them, and I'm sure there's probably others as well. But I bet it's a lot of some sincere Catholics and others who are not sincere. I'm sure it comes from all kinds of places. Tess, thank you so much for that super chat. Thank you, Michael, for all you do and all you suffer in defense of the Pope, the magisterium of the Church. Well, when they cut off my arm and cut out my tongue, then we could talk about me suffering. But I do appreciate that, by the way. And thank you so much for that super chat. Okay. All right, I think I grabbed everything there from the chat, so that should do it. By the way, thank you, Richard, for gifting those memberships. Really appreciate it. Pray for Vigano's repentance. Absolutely, please do. I'll keep him in prayer that he repents and turns away, gives up his false church that he has created. Pray for LifeSiteNews to stop promoting this fake church. And all the others who are being used by Vigano to currently promote his agenda, whether they realize it or not. I want to know what the people who have promoted Vigano have to say at this point. You got Marshall, and you got others like Strickland who have really promoted him. Marshall much more than Strickland, have really promoted Vigano for a while now. And now that Vigano is saying even the popes of the post-conciliar era are not popes, not just Francis, that's then calling into question all of the ordinations of bishops. all the priests, all the masses, everything. I want to know what they think about that. What does Marshall think about that? That would mean Marshall hasn't been confirmed. In most cases, Marshall hasn't been receiving the Eucharist. In most cases, Marshall's confessions haven't been valid. If Marshall is still going to a Catholic church and not the SSPX or something, I know for a while he was going to the SSPX, but if he's still going to an FSSP church, that means the FSSP stuff is bunk. That means that the local ordinary there is completely invalid, hasn't been validly ordained, and so it calls into question everything. So what does Marshall think about that? Does he agree with this? Does he think that Vigano is going too far? I'd love to hear his commentary. Thank you so much for the super chat. Cactoid Jim. Vigano's trial went by so fast because he never bothered to answer the charges or show up, guessing Rupnik is fighting back. Yeah, there's a lot more complexities with his case. And, I would hope, I would think, I would want for there to be an automatic excommunication for sex abusers. To my knowledge, that's not in canon law. Please correct me if I'm wrong, if I missed it, but I haven't seen that. So, again, maybe I'm missing some information here, but the best that I can tell, there's not an automatic excommunication for the sex abuse stuff, and that's unfortunate. I think that there should be. The fact that there isn't makes it a lot more complex. Whereas in the case of schism, there is an automatic excommunication for that. So, of course, in the case of Vigano, it's going to go by quicker. Although, in my opinion, it has been a long time coming. It hasn't gone by quickly because he's been doing this for several years now. And he already acknowledges he's not in communion with Pope Francis. So it's an open and shut case. A lot more complex than what we see with the Rupnik situation, even though Pope Francis has opened that investigation on Rupnik, and we'll find out more about it soon. The Rupnik thing also involves a lot of victims and witnesses. Yeah, there's going to be a lot more claims that you have to take into account. A lot more. Didn't Rupnik also absolve a sexual partner? Yes, and that does have an automatic excommunication. And when I went through the situation, it seems there was a lot going on there in reference to that. And it doesn't appear that it was handled very well, which is why Pope Francis lifted the statute of limitations to proceed with a canonical trial against him. So, but yeah, for the issue of sex abuse itself, there isn't an automatic excommunication. Thank you so much, Gmar, for that super chat. This is a donation on behalf of one of the mouthpieces who, after I said a $5 donation wouldn't go to you every time, he said something slanderous about you. Hope he's watching. You're so generous. Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. And thank you so much for that super chat. Vigano's case is way more straightforward because he confessed his crimes. Right. Yes. So it's obviously not analogous. So the veganist apologists like John Henry Westen and others, and even to a degree Taylor Marshall, they're obviously comparing apples and oranges. But it's going to be very effective on the average person who isn't informed on these issues. All right. Well, I think I grabbed everything there from the chat. Thank you all so much for those super chats. Everybody hit the like button and the subscribe button. And again, share this on your social media with other people who may be confused about these situations. That's the best thing that we can do to help snatch more souls from the grip that Satan has on so many people and to help them avoid this new false parallel church that Vigano has created. All right. We'll see you later. God bless. For years, I've tirelessly defended the Catholic magisterium, despite pushback from numerous people slandering this ministry, misrepresenting it, and calling for its cancellation. Our situation today is very similar to the days of St. Maximus the Confessor, who was constantly pressured to deviate from the teachings of Rome and embrace the heresies that many other bishops were promoting. He was exiled, ridiculed, slandered, but he stood fast despite this persecution, which also included the imperial court of Constantinople cutting off his arm and ripping out his tongue so that he could no longer write the truth and speak the truth. It can be costly to speak the truth and defend the papacy in an age that is so hostile towards it, just like during the days of St. Maximus. But this is what we are called to do. This is the faith and tradition of our forefathers. I plead for all Catholics to stand up for our church and defend it. And consider supporting this channel that has been vindicated by Rome's decisions time after time again. You can do that by subscribing and supporting this ministry at patreon.com/Reason and Theology or reasonandtheology.locals.com. There's also a PayPal and a GoFundMe link in the description of this video. God bless.